You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1. Part 1. You will hear a woman phoning a company that converts old photographs to digital format. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 3. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 3.
Hello, Picture Rep. Can I help you?
Oh, hi. I saw your advertisement about copying pictures to disk, and I'd like a bit more information about what you do.
Sure. What would you like to know?
Well, I've got a box full of old family photos that's been up in the attic for years. Some of them must be 50 or 60 years old, and I'd like to get them converted to digital format.
Sure, we can do that for you.
Right. And what about size? The photos are all sorts of sizes. Are there any restrictions?
Well, the maximum size of photo we can do with our normal service is 30 centimetres, and each picture must be at least 4 centimetres. That's the minimum we can cope with.
Well, that should be fine. And some of them are in a frame. Should I take them out before I send them?
Yes, please. We can't copy them otherwise. And also the photos must all be separate. They mustn't be stuck into an album.
OK, that's not a problem. So, can you give me an idea of how much this will cost? I've got about 360 photos, I think.
We charge £195 for 300 to 400 photos for the basic service.
OK, and does that include the disc?
Yes, 1 disc, but you can get extra ones for £5 each.
That's good. So, do I need to pay when I send you the photos?
No, we won't need anything until we've actually copied the pictures. Then we'll let you know how much it is, and once we've received the payments, we'll send the parcel off to you.
Right.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 4 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 4 to 10.
Is there anything else you'd like to ask about our services?
Yes, I've roughly sorted out the photos into groups, according to what they're about. So, can you keep them in those groups when you copy them?
Sure, we'll save each group in a different folder on the disk, and if you like, you can suggest a name for each folder.
So, I could have one called Grandparents, for instance.
Exactly.
And do you do anything besides scan the photos? Like, can you make any improvements?
Yes, in the standard service, each photo is checked, and we can sometimes touch up the colour a bit or improve the contrast. That can make a big difference.
OK, and some of the photos are actually quite fragile. They won't get damaged in the process, will they?
No, if any look particularly fragile, we'd do them by hand. We do realise how precious these old photos can be.
Sure.
And another thing is we can make changes to a photo if you want. So if you want to remove an object from a photo, or maybe alter the background, we can do that.
Really? I might be interested in that. I'll have a look through the photos and see. Oh, and talking of fixing photos, I've got a few that aren't properly in focus. Can you do anything to make that better?
No, I'm afraid that's one thing we can't do.
Okay.
Any other information I can give you?
How long will it all take?
We aim to get the copying done in 10 days.
Fine. Right, well, I'll get the photos packed up in a box and post them off to you.
Right. If you've got a strong cardboard box, that's best. We've found that plastic ones sometimes break in the post.
Okay. Right, thanks for your help. Bye.
Bye.
That is the end of part 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers to part 1.
Section 2. You will hear a man talking on the radio about a national arts centre. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Hello, and welcome to Focus on the Arts. I'm your host, Dave Green, and this is your very own local radio programme. Every Friday evening, we put the spotlight on different arts and culture facilities and look at the shows and events that are on offer in the coming week. And today, the focus is on the National Arts Centre. Now, if you don't already know it yourself, I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's famous throughout the world as one of the major venues for classical music. But did you know that it's actually much more than just a place to hear concerts? The centre itself is a huge complex that caters for a great range of arts. Under a single roof it houses concert rooms, theatres, cinemas, art galleries and a wonderful public library, as well as service facilities including 3 restaurants and a bookshop. So, at any one time, the choice of entertainment there is simply enormous. So, how did they manage to build such a big arts complex right in the heart of the city? Well, the area was completely destroyed by bombs during the war in 1940. So the opportunity was taken to create a cultural centre that would be what they called the city's gift to the nation. Of course, it took a while for such a big project to get started, but it was planned in the 60s, built in the 70s, and eventually opened to the public in 1983. Ever since then, it has proved to be a great success. It's not privately owned, like many arts centres, but is still in public hands. It's run by the City Council. Both our National Symphony Orchestra and National Theatre Company were involved in the planning of the project, and they're now based there, giving regular performances every week. And as the centre is open 363 days of the year, there are plenty of performances to choose from.
Before you hear the rest of the broadcast, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
So, to give you some idea of what's on, and to help you choose from the many possibilities, we've made a selection of the star attractions. If you're interested in classical music, then we recommend you go along to the National on either Monday or Tuesday evening at 7:30 for a spectacular production of The Magic Flute, probably the most popular of all Mozart's operas. It's in the Garden Hall, and tickets start at only £8, but you'll have to be early if you want to get them that cheap. And remember, it's only on for those 2 evenings. For those more interested in the cinema, you might like to see the new Canadian film, which is showing on Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. in Cinema 2, and that's called 3 Lives. It's had fantastic reviews, and tickets cost just £4.50, which is a reduction on the usual price of £5.50. So, it's really good value, especially for such a great movie. But you can see the centre's main attraction at the weekend, because on Saturday and Sunday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m, they're showing a wonderful new exhibition that hasn't been seen anywhere else in Europe yet. It's a collection of Chinese art called Faces of China. That's in Gallery 1, and it has some really fascinating paintings and sculptures by leading artists from all over China. And the good news is that it's completely free, so don't miss it. So why not go along to the National Arts Centre next week for one or all of these great events? And you can always pick up a programme and check out all the other performances and exhibitions on offer, or coming soon, on almost every day of the year. Next week, we'll be looking at the new Museum of Science.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Part 3. You will hear 2 psychology students, called Luke and Susie, discussing their assignment on sleep and dreams. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
So, Luke, for our next psychology assignment, we have to do something on sleep and dreams.
Right. I've just read an article suggesting why we tend to forget most of our dreams soon after we wake up. I mean, most of my dreams aren't that interesting anyway. But what it said was that if we remembered everything, we might get mixed up about what actually happened and what we dreamed. So it's a sort of protection. I hadn't heard that idea before. I'd always assumed that it was just that we didn't have room in our memories for all that stuff.
Me too. What do you think about the idea that our dreams may predict the future?
It's a belief that you get all over the world.
Yeah. Lots of people have a story of it happening to them. But the explanation I've read is that for each dream that comes true, we have thousands that don't, but we don't notice those. We don't even remember them. We just remember the ones where something in the real world, like a view or an action, happens to trigger a dream memory.
Right. So it's just a coincidence, really. Something else I read about is what they call segmented sleeping. That's a theory that hundreds of years ago, people used to get up in the middle of the night and have a chat or something to eat, then go back to bed. So I tried it myself.
Why?
Well, it's meant to make you more creative. I don't know why, but I gave it up after a week. It just didn't fit in with my lifestyle.
But most preschool children have a short sleep in the day, don't they? There was an experiment some students did here last term to see at what age kids should stop having naps, but they didn't really find an answer. They spent a lot of time working out the most appropriate methodology, but the results didn't seem to show any obvious patterns.
Right. Anyway, let's think about our assignment. Last time I had problems with the final stage, where we had to describe and justify how successful we thought we'd been. I struggled a bit with the action plan too.
I was okay with the planning, but I got marked down for the self-assessment as well. And I had big problems with the statistical stuff. That's where I really lost marks.
Right.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
So, shall we plan what we have to do for this assignment?
Okay.
First, we have to decide on our research question. So, how about, is there a relationship between hours of sleep and number of dreams?
Okay. Then we need to think about who we'll do the study on. About 12 people?
Right. And shall we use other psychology students?
Let's use people from a different department. What about history?
Yes, they might have interesting dreams. Or literature students.
I don't really know any.
Okay, forget that idea. Then we have to think about our methodology. So we could use observation, but that doesn't seem appropriate.
No. It needs to be self-reporting, I think. And we could ask them to answer questions online.
But in this case, paper might be better, as they'll be doing it straight after they wake up. In fact, while they're still half asleep.
Right. And we'll have to check the ethical guidelines for this sort of research.
Because our experiment involves humans, so there are special regulations.
Yes. I had a look at those for another assignment I did. There's a whole section on risk assessment, and another section on making sure they aren't put under any unnecessary stress.
Let's hope they don't have any bad dreams.
Yeah.
Then, when we've collected all our data, we have to analyse it and calculate the correlation between our two variables. That's time sleeping and number of dreams. And then present our results visually in a graph.
Right, and the final thing is to think about our research and evaluate it. So, that seems quite straightforward.
Yeah. So, now let's get started.
That is the end of part 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers to part 3.
Now turn to section 4. Section 4. You will hear a lecture about success in business systems. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. In the last few lectures, I've been dealing with business finance, but now I'm going to move on to business systems. And in today's lecture, I'm going to talk about what can go wrong when businesses try to copy their own best practices. Once a business has successfully introduced a new process, managing a branch bank, say, or selling a new product, the parent organization naturally wants to repeat that success and capture it, if possible, on a bigger scale. The goal, then, is to utilize existing knowledge and not to generate new knowledge. It's a less glamorous activity than pure innovation, but it actually happens more often, as a matter of fact. However, surprisingly, getting things right the second time is not necessarily any simpler than it was the first time. Now, there's been a lot of research into how companies can repeat their previous successes, and it certainly hasn't been confined to the United States. It seems that most large industries are trying to repeat their own successes and manage the knowledge they've acquired. But even so, it has been shown that the overwhelming majority of attempts fail. A host of studies confirm this, covering a wide range of business settings: branch banks, retail stores, real estate agencies, factories, call centers, to name but a few. So why do so few managers get things right the second or third time? Let's consider one reason for failure: placing too much trust in the people who are running the successful operation, the experts, shall we say. Managers who want to apply existing knowledge typically start off by going to an expert, such as the person who designed and is running a successful department store, and picking their brains. Now, this approach can be used if you want to gain a rough understanding of a particular system, or understand smaller, isolated problems. The trouble is, even the expert doesn't fully grasp the whole thing, because when it comes to complex systems, the individual components of the process are interwoven with one another. The expert never has complete access to the necessary information. And the situation's complicated even further by the fact that experts are usually not aware of their own ignorance. The ignorance can take various forms. For instance, a lot of details of the system are invisible to managers. Some may be difficult to describe, learned on the job, and well known by workers, perhaps, but impossible to describe in a way that's helpful. And there are some things that people know or do that they're not even aware of. Now, let's consider two types of mistake that can occur when a manager actually starts to set up a duplicate system to replicate a successful process. Firstly, perhaps he forgets that he was just trying to copy another process and starts trying to improve on it. Another mistake is trying to use the best parts of various different systems in the hope of creating the perfect combination. Unfortunately, attempts like these usually turn out to be misguided and lead to problems. Why? Well, for various reasons. Perhaps there weren't really any advantages after all, because the information wasn't accurate. Or perhaps the business settings weren't really comparable. More typically, the advantages are real enough, but there are also disadvantages that have been overlooked. For example, the modifications might compromise safety in some way. So, what's the solution? Well, I don't intend to suggest that it's easy to get things right the second time. It's not. But the underlying problem has more to do with attitudes than the actual difficulty of the task, and there are ways of getting it right. These involve adjusting attitudes, first of all. Being more realistic and cautious, really. Secondly, they involve exerting strict controls on the organizational and operational systems. And this, in turn, means copying the original as closely as possible. Not merely duplicating the physical characteristics of the factory, but also duplicating the skills that the original employees had. Reliance on a template like this offers the huge advantage of built-in consistency.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.